Hey guys, tonight we are stepping softly into the still air of Cambodia at first light, where the jungle mist curls around towers of sandstone that rise like ancient fingers pointing toward the pale skies. You stand at the edge of Angkor, the once great city of the Khmer Empire, and for a moment it feels as though time itself has been lulled to sleep here. Banyan roots have split stone walls. Pools of water reflect faces carved centuries ago. The quiet is so complete that you can almost hear the breath of the jungle itself. And yet, behind this calm, you sense a story that is anything but simple. The rise of an empire, the toil of millions, and the slow, inevitable fading that left these ruins scattered like broken teeth across the forest floor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always strangely comforting to know that someone on the other side of the world might be drifting off alongside you. You move closer, stepping beneath the looming gate of Angkor Thom, where giant serene faces are carved into the towers. Their eyes seem to follow you, calm but knowing, as if to remind you that thousands of lives once passed this same threshold daily. You can imagine the press of merchants guiding ox carts, monks in saffron robes chanting softly, elephants plodding with bundles of rice or timber. The ground you walk on is worn by centuries of footsteps, even though today moss and grass have softened its edges. Your guide tonight is not a priest or a king, but the ruins themselves, whispering in stone and shadow. The Khmer Empire began here more than 1,000 years ago, when kings staked their authority not only on armies, but on water, on faith, and on the dazzling spectacle of temples like Angkor Wat. Each tower was not just stone, but a mountain in miniature, each causeway a bridge between heaven and earth. But look closer. These temples were not built to be timeless. They were built to impress in their own day. The sandstone was ferried from quarries miles away, floated down rivers, and hauled by thousands of laborers. Every carved lotus, every dancing apsara figure was made by human hands working in the thick heat of tropical air. These stones were never silent. They rang with chisels, echoed with chants, and shimmered with gilded paint that has long since washed away. As you stand among the ruins, it's easy to forget that Angkor was more than temples. Behind these monuments stretched a city so vast that it dwarfed any medieval European capital. Archaeologists using lasers have revealed roads, canals, suburbs, and markets extending across hundreds of square miles. At its height, Angkor may have supported close to 1 million people, an astonishing number in the pre-modern world. Imagine the smoke of 1,000 cook fires drifting into the air, the sound of bells calling elephants back to their stables, the murmuring of priests teaching Sanskrit texts to students under shady verandas. And yet, there's a haunting question. If this place was so mighty, why are you walking through ruins instead of a living city? You probably wouldn't survive a day in Angkor's prime. Truth be told, the humid heat, the swarms of mosquitoes, the rigid social hierarchies demanding endless labor for king and gods. But you would witness something spectacular, a civilization so finely tuned to water, agriculture, and belief that it seemed it might never end, until, slowly, it did. For now, though, let yourself linger In this first impression, the birds call above you, and the roots of strangler figs embrace stones like old friends who refuse to let go. The city is gone, but its memory clings to every tower and every step you take. We will wander deeper into that memory together, letting the story of Angkor unfold one quiet layer at a time. Like petals on a lotus, drifting on still water, you step further in, and the first thing you notice is not the temples themselves, but the water. Even though many of the great reservoirs are now silent pools, carpeted with lilies, their scale still takes your breath away. To your left stretches the West Baray, an artificial lake so vast it looks like an inland sea. Its banks once held millions of cubic meters of water, painstakingly directed through channels and embankments carved by human labor. The Khmer didn't just build monuments, they re-engineered the landscape itself. In the humid morning light, imagine the scene 1,000 years ago. You'd see workers hauling baskets of soil to reinforce dikes, engineers, yes, engineers, measuring gradients with ropes and plumb lines, and overseers chanting instructions as the sun beat down. Reservoirs, canals, and spillways snaked across the land like veins in a living body. Angkor was, above all, a city of water, and water meant life. It meant 3 rice harvests a year instead of 1. It meant surplus grain to feed the king's armies and builders. It meant stability in seasons when the rains faltered and protection in times of flood. For the Khmer, mastery of water was mastery of destiny. When foreign envoys arrived, Chinese emissaries, Indian traders, even envoys from as far as Persia, they marveled not only at the golden towers, but at the endless waterways threading through the jungle. But as you walk beside these ancient canals, the water is still, broken only by the glide of a dragonfly. The silence hides the enormous hum that once filled this place. Picture boats, laden with rice sacks, moving along the channels, their paddlers singing to keep rhythm. Farmers steered wooden rafts, carrying bundles of sugar cane, spices, and pottery. Monks floated gently to monasteries, their saffron robes catching the reflection of the sky on the rippling water. The Khmer Empire was unique because it fused divine ambition with practical necessity. Every king who built a temple also built waterworks. Angkor Wat may dazzle your eyes, but it was the vast hydraulic system, the endless web of canals and reservoirs that actually kept the city alive. Without it, there could be no temples, no armies, no great festivals, and yet, such an achievement was fragile. You can almost sense it as you wander now. The way water must be guided, adjusted, coaxed into flowing where it should. One broken embankment, one season of extreme floods, and the balance teetered. The same canals that fed life could also spread disaster if they overflowed or ran dry. Imagine lying in your hammock at night as a Khmer villager. You hear the rustle of palm leaves, the croak of frogs in the ditches, and the steady trickle of water through the channels that encircle your village. That sound is your lullaby, your insurance, your king's promise. You trust that the berets will hold, that the canals will not clog, that the engineers will adjust the flows. You sleep knowing water is being carried and guarded like treasure. But in the long sweep of time, these delicate systems did falter. Sediment built up, floods damaged embankments, and droughts stretched the reservoirs thin. You see evidence of this now in dry beds and cracked laterite blocks. Still, it is important to remember that for centuries the system worked. It worked so well that Angkor became the beating heart of Southeast Asia, a city whose waterworks rivaled anything in the ancient world. So tonight, as you listen, let yourself drift with that water. Imagine it lapping gently against stone embankments, reflecting torchlight from the city at dusk. Picture workers dozing under the stars after a day of hauling soil, their muscles sore, but their stomachs full. Water was the empire's gift, its strength, and eventually its weakness, and it will guide us like a river into the rest of Angkor's story. Now that you've wandered past the great reservoirs and canals, it's time to pause in the heart of Angkor, not among kings or priests, but among its ordinary people. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the murmur of voices rising from a marketplace, the clatter of bronze pots, the squeak of wooden cartwheels on the dusty streets. This was not a city of empty stone courtyards. It was alive with farmers, artisans, traders, and children darting barefoot between stalls. You stroll down a wide avenue shaded by palm trees. On your right, vendors sell rice, porridge, flavored with fish sauce and ginger. On your left, a craftsman hammers delicate designs into bronze bangles. A few steps further, and the air fills with the sharp smell of fermented fish paste, prahok, being scooped into clay jars. That smell, pungent and unavoidable, was the scent of Khmer kitchens, the foundation of almost every meal. The people here lived in stilt houses made of wood and thatch. Few traces remain today, because the tropical climate devoured them long ago. But in your mind, you see rows of houses raised above the ground, chickens scratching below, and the woven mats laid out inside. Smoke curls from small clay stoves, where women prepare sticky rice or fry river fish in oil. Children splash in the ditches, chasing frogs and laughing in the humid air. Imagine being one of them. You wake before dawn, hearing the low chanting of monks echoing from a nearby shrine. You join your parents in tending the fields, or perhaps you head to market with baskets balanced on your shoulders. You are part of a society where every grain of rice and every block of sandstone is counted as part of the king's cosmic order. You know your place, but you also know the simple joys of roasted bananas, folk songs hummed on warm evenings, and the occasional festival when dancers in shimmering silk whirl through the streets. For the craftsmen of Angkor, work was both labor and art. Stone carvers spent months chiseling a single lintel with curling vines and gods, stride elephants. Potters turned wet clay into storage jars, sturdy enough to last decades. Even the simplest objects, a woven basket, a carved wooden spoon, were made with patience and skill, handed down from parents to children. These were the invisible hands that sustained the grandeur of Angkor Wat and Bayonne. The city's rhythms shifted with the seasons. In the monsoon, the streets turned into streams, and markets filled with lotus stems, melons, and fresh fish wriggling in woven traps. In the dry season, dust rose from the roads as oxen carts creaked along, carrying rice to warehouses and temples. Through it all, the great reservoirs you visited earlier kept the cycle going, ensuring that kitchens remained full and offerings could be laid at the shrines. And of course, life was not without hardship. Taxes weighed heavily, and much of what farmers produced was claimed for the state or the temple. Draft labor could take you away from your fields for weeks, even months, hauling stone or building embankments. Disease lingered in the humid air, and floods sometimes swept away whole villages. Yet despite these burdens, people found contentment in family, ritual, and the certainty that their toil connected them to something larger, the gods themselves. If you listen closely, you can hear a lullaby. A mother croons to her child, the same soothing cadence repeated for centuries. The sounds of the market fade into the distance, replaced by the chirping of cicadas as night falls. Oil lamps flicker in wooden houses, casting shadows that dance like apsaras across woven walls. The city rests, ready to rise again at dawn. So, as you lie back and let your mind drift, picture not just the grandeur of towers, but the warmth of cooking fires, the splash of buckets in canals, the laughter of children chasing fireflies. Angkor was not only temples, it was a living, breathing community. And that community, invisible now, is what truly made the empire flourish. You drift now from the wooden houses and noisy markets into the solemn silence of the temples. Angkor was not just a city of people and water, it was a city of gods made visible in stone. As you step onto the long causeway leading toward Angkor Wat itself, you feel the air grow heavier, hushed, as though you are entering a place where every block of sandstone was meant to echo eternity. The carvings come first. Along the walls stretch bas reliefs, hundreds of meters long, each line etched with patience that boggles the mind. You run your hand along the cool stone, and there you find armies of soldiers marching in tight formation, chariots pulled by horses, kings towering above their troops. In another panel, the ocean is churned by gods and demons pulling on the body of a giant serpent, their muscles rippling in eternal effort to create the nectar of immortality. And then there are the apsaras, heavenly dancers, posed in graceful arcs, their stone fingers delicate, their smiles timeless, as if they've been caught mid-dance and never allowed to stop. At dusk, when the low sun gilds the walls, you can almost see the paint that once covered them. These carvings were not meant to be gray and bare. They shimmered once with reds, blues, and gold leaf. The apsaras had bright lips. The soldiers carried painted shields. The kings wore crowns that glittered in the torchlight. Today, the jungle has stripped them of color. But if you close your eyes, you can imagine the murals alive with motion and light, a spectacle designed to overwhelm both peasants and princes alike. You step into the inner courtyards, where the architecture itself tells a story. Each temple was a microcosm of the universe, with a central tower rising like Mount Meru, the mythical axis of creation. The moats that encircle the temples were not just defenses, they were oceans surrounding the sacred mountains of the gods. Walking across a causeway, you weren't simply moving toward a building, you were crossing from the earthly realm into the divine. The priests knew how to amplify this symbolism. Festivals would fill the courtyards with music and incense, the air thick with sandalwood smoke and chanting. Pilgrims pressed flowers against stone shrines, while kings processed in robes heavy with gold, elephants draped in silk behind them. It was theater on a cosmic scale, designed to remind every subject that their ruler was not merely human, but the earthly vessel of divine order. At night, though, the temples grew quiet, the torches dimmed, the worshippers went home, and the gods sat alone in the dark. Imagine being a guard then, pacing the stone galleries by torchlight. You hear your own footsteps echo off the walls, the flicker of flame revealing faces carved into every column. Their eyes follow you. You are not alone here, you realize. You never are. The temple walls hold the stories of generations, the victories and prayers of people whose names are long forgotten. Even today, when you sit inside these ruins, a strange calm settles over you. The apsaras smile, the gods churn their serpent, the soldiers march on. Time, which crumbled wooden houses and swallowed canals, seems powerless here. The stone still speaks. It whispers of faith, ambition, and the sheer audacity of carving a universe out of sandstone. So let yourself lean back, as if reclining in the shade of a temple colonnade. Breathe in slowly. Imagine the faint fragrance of incense clinging to the air, the low murmur of chanting echoing across the courtyard. You are surrounded by stories carved into stone, stories that have waited 1,000 years for you to listen. You leave the temple walls behind now and slip into the royal compounds that once stood nearby, the places where power was spoken not in sandstone, but in ceremony, silk, and silence. Though little of the wooden palaces remain, time and termites saw to that, you can still sense the weight of authority in the cleared courtyards and raised platforms. Here, beneath gilded pavilions, long vanished, the Khmer kings shaped an empire with gestures as subtle as a lifted eyebrow and as grand as a coronation. Imagine approaching the palace gates on an ordinary day. Guards in lacquered helmets stand at attention, their spears glinting in the morning sun. Courtiers bustle in, robes flowing, bearing scrolls of tax tallies, gifts from merchants, or petitions from villagers. Inside, the air is perfumed with incense and frangipani blossoms. Musicians sit cross-legged on woven mats, playing the gentle metallic tones of Ronayat xylophones, their notes drifting through the halls like whispers. At the center of it all sits the king. He is not merely a man, but a god king, a Devaraja, enthroned as the earthly embodiment of Shiva or Vishnu, depending on the age. When he speaks, scribes bend low to catch every word. When he moves, courtiers shift with him like shadows, careful never to outpace or outshine their sovereign. And when he presides over ceremonies, he is more than ruler, he is cosmic order itself, the axis upon which all things turn. Now picture a royal festival. The courtyards are crowded with nobles in embroidered silk, elephants painted with bright pigments, dancers in gilded headdresses moving with deliberate grace. Drums thrum, conch shells blare, and the king emerges on a palanquin borne by dozens of attendants. To the common people watching from beyond the gates, this spectacle confirms what they already believe, that their ruler is touched by divinity, and that his reign ensures the universe will remain in balance. Yet the palace was not only ceremony. Behind the gilded doors, politics unfolded as carefully as chess. Princes vied for position, ministers whispered strategies, and envoys from China or Champa waited nervously for audiences. Decisions about waterworks, military campaigns, and temple construction were made here, sealed with rituals to ensure divine favors. Every alliance, every law, every gift of land to a monastery was calculated to keep the machinery of empire turning smoothly. For the queen and royal women, life was both privileged and restricted. They moved within inner palaces, attended by handmaidens, their influence subtle but powerful. Inscriptions speak of queens commissioning temples, guiding succession, and even intervening in court politics. Their jewelry sparkled with gold and gemstones. Their silks rustled like whispers in darkened chambers. But their true strength lay in weaving networks of loyalty and bloodline. And what of the servants, the scribes, the countless attendants? They lived in the palace shadows, their lives bound to the rhythms of the court. Scribes hunched over palm leaf manuscripts, copying decrees late into the night by the light of oil lamps. Cooks stirred pots of curry and rice to feed hundreds. Stable boys soothed restless elephants before parades. Each had a role, each a thread in the palace's intricate web. When night fell, the court quieted, but never truly slept. Torches burned low, guards paced the walls, and in the cool, dark chambers, kings and advisors plotted futures that would ripple through the centuries. If you had been there, lying on the polished wooden floors, you might have heard the faint clink of jewelry, the sigh of silk, and the muffled voices of men shaping history in hushed tones. So tonight, as you drift, picture yourself in those courtyards. You recline beneath a canopy of embroidered cloth, the warm night breeze carrying scents of jasmine and sandalwood. The palace hums with quiet, the heartbeat of an empire hidden beneath the silence. The kings may be gone, the wood may be dust, but the aura of command still hangs in the air, like the echo of a drum long stopped. From the polished halls of the palace, you drift outward again, toward the green fields that stretched far beyond the temples and courtyards. Here, in the paddies and ponds, lay the true engine of Angkor: rice, fish, and the endless labor of common people. If the king's court was the brain of the empire, these fields were its beating heart. Picture the morning mist lifting over rows of rice paddies. Farmers in conical hats step barefoot into the water, their reflections trembling on the surface as they plant young shoots one by one. The air hums with cicadas and the calls of water birds. In the distance, buffalo plod slowly, dragging wooden plows that slice the muddy soil. Every harvest was a cycle of sweat and patience, and without it, no temple could rise, no king could sit on his throne. Beside the paddies, ponds brim with fish, a second lifeline of the Khmer diet. Families cast woven nets, drawing in wriggling catches that would be grilled fresh, salted, or pounded into prahok, the pungent paste that flavored nearly every meal. Children splashed at the edges, chasing small crabs and frogs, while their parents worked with steady rhythm. The smell of fermenting fish might have seemed overwhelming to a visitor, but for locals, it was the scent of security. The labor was constant. In one season, villagers sowed. In another, they weeded. In another, they harvested. After harvest came threshing, then storing, then carting grain to warehouses near the temples, where scribes carefully recorded every measure owed in tax. Imagine lines of oxen carts creaking down dusty roads, stacked high with sacks of rice, the drivers singing to keep time as the wheels groaned over the earth. For many, life was hard. Tax collectors arrived regularly, tallying harvests, demanding grain or labor as tribute. Drafted workers could be taken from their villages for weeks to quarry sandstone, repair embankments, or build new reservoirs. Families sometimes struggled to balance the king's demands with their own needs, but still they endured. Their resilience was what allowed Angkor's monuments to shimmer on the horizon. Festivals offered relief. At the end of harvest, whole villages gathered to honor the spirits of the rice. Offerings of flowers, incense, and sweet rice cakes were laid out, while dancers in simple costumes imitated the movements of birds and buffalo. Laughter rose, drums beat, and for a brief moment the endless cycle of toil turned into joy. Evenings in the villages were gentler. Picture yourself reclining under a stilt house, the air still warm, fireflies flickering at the edge of the fields, families gathered to share meals, bowls of rice, grilled fish, perhaps a few vegetables cooked in coconut milk. Children dozed against their mothers' laps as elders told stories of kings and gods, their voices weaving myth with memory. What strikes you most, wandering here, is not despair, but persistence. The villagers knew their lives were bound to the rhythms of water and soil, but they also knew how to find beauty within it. A simple song sung while transplanting rice could lift spirits. A carved wooden comb, gifted from one generation to the next, carried quiet pride. In these small acts, you see the invisible threads that held Angkor together. And tonight, as you listen, let yourself imagine lying in one of those stilt houses, a woven mat beneath you, the faint crackle of the hearth still glowing. Outside, frogs croak in chorus, and the fields, heavy with rice, shimmer faintly in the moonlight. Above the grandeur of temples and palaces, it was here, in mud and water, in fish and grain, that Angkor truly lived. From the villages and fields, your path turns toward the city's broad avenues, where the world beyond Angkor arrived with clinking coins, curious eyes, and exotic wares. This was not an isolated empire sealed behind jungle walls. It was a crossroads where merchants and envoys from far off lands came to trade, to observe, and sometimes to scheme. Imagine standing at one of Angkor's main gates as a caravan arrives. The air fills with the creak of the wagon wheels, the shuffle of elephants, and the voices of men speaking languages you don't quite understand. Traders from India bring bolts of cotton cloth, peppercorns, and polished beads. Chinese merchants arrive by boat along the Tonle Sap, bearing silk, ceramics, and sometimes even tea. From the kingdom of Champa to the east come envoys, carrying tribute of fragrant wood and spices. Angkor streets, dusty and wide, echoed with this mingling of tongues and goods. The Khmer themselves offered rice, dried fish, palm sugar, and forest products, honey, resins, and rare woods. Elephants, too, were prized, both as beasts of war and as gifts to impress foreign courts. Imagine the negotiations, a Khmer official in stiff robes, listening gravely as a foreign trader tries to haggle over jars of fragrant resin. The words are formal, the gestures measured, but behind them hums the steady exchange that tied Angkor to the wider world. Envoys brought more than goods. They brought stories. Chinese scribes noted Angkor's grand processions, the golden towers gleaming in sunlight, the endless fields of rice. They wrote of the people's customs, how they bathed often in rivers, how they dressed in cotton skirts, how they ate rice with fish at every meal. These outsiders marveled at the scale of the city, at its order, at its strange blend of piety and practicality. For the Khmer, this outside attention was both flattering and strategic. To receive an envoy from China or India was to confirm their place in the world's hierarchy of kings. Ceremonies were staged with precision, gifts presented in lacquered boxes dancers whirling in glittering costumes, musicians filling the halls with steady rhythms. Behind every bow and every offering lay the unspoken message: Angkor is strong, Angkor is wealthy, Angkor endures. But beneath the grandeur, there were also tensions. Neighboring powers like Champa and later Siam eyed Angkor's wealth hungrily. Traders came not just with silk and porcelain, but with information, news of shifting alliances, rumors of armies on the move. Imagine hearing whispers in a marketplace that a rival king was growing too bold, that Angkor's strength was being tested far from its walls. Still, on most days, the city welcomed the outside world with open arms. Walk through a marketplace, and you'd hear not only Khmer, but snatches of Chinese, Malay, and Indian tongues. The stalls smelled of spices unfamiliar. The fabrics shimmered with patterns from distant looms. To live in Angkor was to live at the center of a web stretching across Asia, a web spun from rice, silk, elephants, and ambition. Tonight, as you rest, picture yourself on one of those avenues. You watch the envoys pass by, their robes fluttering, their elephants swaying. The crowd parts in awe, children craning their necks to glimpse the strange faces and exotic wares. For a moment, the jungle city feels like the center of the universe, its pulse beating in rhythm with lands far beyond the horizon. Step now into the rhythm of the seasons, because life in Angkor was never steady. It pulsed with the rains. The Khmer Empire lived and breathed according to the monsoon, and in those cycles of abundance and scarcity, you can begin to see how fragile greatness really was. Picture the first rains breaking after a long dry season. The sky darkens, thunder rolls across the horizon, and then water pours from the heavens in sheets so thick you can hardly see. Farmers laugh with relief, running barefoot into the paddies to feel the cool drops on their skin. The canals swell, reservoirs fill, and for a brief moment, the world seems renewed. Rice seedlings drink greedily, and lotus flowers spread their wide leaves to catch the falling drops. For months, the rains transform the land into a shimmering mosaic of water and green. Fish multiply in the flooded fields. Frogs croak in deafening chorus, and the reservoirs brim so high that their surfaces glitter like mirrors under the sun. Angkor's engineers open and close spillways, guiding the flood into channels that both nourish and protect the city. At this time of year, the empire feels invincible. But then comes the dry season. Day by day, the fields crack, the ponds shrink, and the canals run sluggish and brown. Farmers bend low to scoop water from wells. The air grows hotter, thicker, and the sun bakes the earth until even the trees seem to droop in exhaustion. In these months, the reservoirs are lifelines, their waters parceled out carefully to sustain crops and people alike. Imagine lying in a wooden stilt house at night, hearing the creak of the wind and the silence of thirsty earth. Your family wonders if the rains will return in time. You trust the canals, but you also know how easily they can fail. One clogged channel, one broken embankment, and your harvest could wither before your eyes. Sometimes the monsoon was fickle, too much rain, and floods swallowed entire villages, sweeping away dikes and drowning fields. Too little, and droughts stretched on until the soil turned to dust. Archaeologists have traced layers of silt and pollen that suggest Angkor faced not just ordinary cycles, but centuries when the climate shifted dramatically. Long droughts punctuated by sudden floods. For a society that relied so completely on managing water, these shifts were devastating. And yet, for centuries, the Khmer endured. They adapted, repaired, rebuilt, reservoirs were dredged, canals straightened, dikes reinforced. Generations poured their labor into maintaining the balance. But even as they worked, cracks formed, literal cracks in embankments, and metaphorical ones in the stability of the empire. The water system that had made Angkor mighty was also its most delicate weakness. Think of the farmers again. Each year, they rose before dawn to check the paddies, to adjust dikes with their bare hands, to pray for steady rains. They lived with the knowledge that nature could undo months of labor overnight. Yet they kept planting, kept singing in the fields, kept trusting that the rhythm of the seasons would hold. Their resilience was the heartbeat of Angkor, even as storms gathered on the horizon. So, as you drift tonight, imagine that first heavy rainfall striking a palm leaf, the deep scent of wet earth rising into the air. Hear the croak of frogs echo across the paddies, the rush of water filling a canal. For a moment, you feel the relief, the abundance, the life that the monsoon brought. And then you remember how quickly it could turn, how fragile even the greatest empire could be when everything depended on the sky. From the restless skies, you turn your attention back to the ground, to the uneasy echoes of marching feet and clashing blades. Angkor was not only a city of water and worship, it was also a fortress, and more than once its walls shook under the weight of invaders. Imagine standing atop the gates of Angkor Thom, gazing outward across the jungle plain. The horizon shimmers with heat, and in the distance, dust rises, an army on the move. The Khmer Empire, for centuries the dominant power of Southeast Asia, faced rivals who tested its borders again and again. Among them were the Chams to the east, and, later, the Siamese from Ayutthaya to the west, hungry for Angkor's wealth and prestige. The chronicles tell us that in the 12th century, the Chams launched a daring raid, even managing to storm Angkor itself. Picture the chaos: temple bells clanging, villagers fleeing into the forests, guards scrambling to bar gates as enemy warriors surged through the avenues. For a brief, terrifying moment, the heart of the empire lay exposed. But the Khmer struck back. King Jayavarman VII rose in that crisis, rallying armies, expelling the invaders, and rebuilding Angkor with even grander monuments like Bayon, its serene faces watching over the city as if to promise never again. Yet never again was a fragile vow. Centuries later, Siamese forces grew stronger, their eyes fixed on Angkor's riches. They knew that to conquer Angkor was not just to seize territory, but to claim legitimacy, to wear the crown of kingship once associated with the Khmer. Wars flared, cities burned, and though Angkor's temples stood unmoved, the people who filled them grew weary. The soldiers of Angkor marched in armor of leather and bronze, wielding spears, bows, and curved sabers. Elephants, towering and unstoppable, thundered onto battlefields with tusks capped in iron. The clash of such beasts must have been a sound both terrifying and awe-inspiring. But behind the spectacle lay endless toil. Villagers conscripted, fields left untended, families waiting for fathers and brothers who never returned. Inside the city, the fear of invasion lingered like a shadow. Gates were watched more carefully, walls repaired, armies drilled, and yet each time Angkor repelled an enemy, a little more strength drained away, grain spent, lives lost, canals neglected. Even victories came at a cost. At night, picture yourself as a soldier lying on a mat beneath the stars, your spear at your side. You hear the croak of frogs, the buzz of insects, but also the distant murmur of comrades whispering about the next campaign. You know your king demands loyalty, your gods demand sacrifice, and your family depends on your survival. In that uneasy space between duty and fear, you drift into restless sleep. So too did Angkor. Though the city rebuilt itself time and again, each invasion left scars, not always visible in stone, but etched into the lives of its people. The serene faces of Bayonne smiled down as if nothing had changed, but beneath them, the ground was shifting. The empire that had once seemed unshakable now stood on foundations quietly eroding. One battle at a time. Step now into the temples again, but listen closely, not for the drums of the war or the bustle of markets, but for the low hum of prayers. Angkor was never fixed in its beliefs. Its stones tell the story of a people whose gods shifted, whose rituals adapted, whose faith transformed in ways as subtle as whispers and as dramatic as revolutions. At first, the empire bowed to Hindu deities. Kings dedicated temples to Shiva and Vishnu, their towers crowned with linga and statues of gods reclining on cosmic serpents. Offerings of rice, flowers, and incense filled sanctuaries, while priests in white robes recited Sanskrit verses carried from India across centuries of trade. To the Khmer, these gods were not distant abstractions. They were woven into the fabric of kingship. When a ruler raised a new shrine, he proclaimed himself the earthly vessel of divine order. But as you walk deeper, you notice something. Shrines once devoted to Shiva, later house statues of the Buddha, carvings of apsaras, are joined by serene seated figures with downcast eyes. The great temple of Angkor Wat itself, though built for Vishnu, would one day shelter monks chanting Buddhist sutras. Over time, the faith of the Khmer shifted from Hindu devotion to Theravada Buddhism, gentler in practice, more focused on the community of monks and the path of compassion. Imagine the contrast. One century, you watch a grand Hindu festival, Brahmin priests pouring libations over a linga, dancers twirling in jewel-studded costumes, conch shells sounding across the courtyards. A century later, you stand in the same temple as orange-robed monks file silently through the galleries, their chants steady and low, bowls in hand as they seek alms from villagers. The grandeur has softened into simplicity, the cosmic kings replaced by humble teachers of the Dharma. This transformation was not sudden, nor without tension. Some kings resisted, some embraced. Inscriptions show temples rededicated, statues repurposed, rituals blended. For ordinary people, the shift may have felt natural. After all, they still offered rice, still lit incense, still sought blessings for harvests and safe journeys. Yet beneath that continuity, something fundamental had changed. The role of the king As divine axis weakened, while the quiet strength of Buddhist monasteries grew, faith at Angkor was never purely religious. It was also deeply practical. Monks ran schools, taught children to read, copied manuscripts on palm leaves. Shrines doubled as community centers, their courtyards sheltering travelers and beggars alike. When drought struck, villagers prayed not only to kings and gods, but to monks whose chants promised comfort. In this way, the temples remained alive, not as static monuments, but as evolving centers of faith and community. If you close your eyes now, you can hear it, the steady beat of a drum during a Hindu procession, fading into the soft murmur of Buddhist monks chanting at dawn. The scent of sandalwood incense lingers in both scenes, unchanged by centuries. The stones hold both histories equally, never erasing, only layering. As you rest tonight, imagine yourself seated in a temple courtyard. As dusk falls, the last rays of the sun strike a statue, perhaps Shiva once, perhaps Buddha now. The chants rise, calm and repetitive, carrying your thoughts outward like ripples on water. Angkor's faiths may have shifted, but their purpose remained the same: to remind humans of their smallness, their duty, and their place within a vast, mysterious order. The temples still stand, the canals still glisten, and the monks still chant. But if you look closer, you begin to see the cracks, not the cracks in sandstone, though those are there too, but the ones in the empire itself. The slow decline of Angkor did not come with a single shattering blow. It came like a creeping shadow, spreading quietly across fields, palaces, and reservoirs until the city could no longer hold itself together. It began, perhaps, with the water. For centuries, the Khmer had mastered rivers and rains. But even mastery has limits. Sediment built up in canals, clogging their flow. Reservoir walls weakened after decades of use. Climate shifts brought long droughts, broken suddenly by years of catastrophic floods. The same system that once fed 1 million mouths began to falter, like a great heart skipping beats. Villages faced hunger, and fields that had once been lush grew patchy and brittle. At the same time, the court grew restless. Successions were disputed, nobles jostled for influence, and unity fractured. Kings who once poured resources into canals and temples now found themselves fighting civil rivals or distracted by wars beyond Angkor's borders. Each dispute left canals unrepaired, taxes uncollected, harvests unguarded. The empire's great machinery began to grind unevenly. Meanwhile, neighbors grew stronger. The Siamese to the west expanded their power, testing Angkor's defenses again and again. Each conflict drained resources. Even victories cost lives and grain. Slowly, the once proud capital found itself less the master of the region and more its beleaguered prize. Walk through Angkor at this stage, and you would notice the subtle differences. The markets are still busy, but stalls look thinner. The temples still hold ceremonies, but the processions are smaller, less lavish. Reservoirs are still dug, but they never quite refill as before. To an outsider, the city might look unchanged, its towers still soaring, its walls still proud. But to those who lived there, the signs of strain were everywhere. Rice stretched thin, taxes higher, whispers of discontent growing louder. And then there were the ordinary people who bore the weight of it all. Farmers worked harder to coax rice from reluctant fields. Families offered more in taxes while keeping less for themselves. Draft labor pulled men from villages for longer stints, repairing reservoirs that failed again within a season. Fatigue crept into the bones of the empire, not sudden, not dramatic, but deep and unrelenting. It is tempting to imagine a single event that ended Angkor, a cataclysm that brought the city down overnight. But history rarely works that way. Instead, the decline was a slow unraveling, threads snapping one after another until the whole tapestry came loose. Water shortages, political instability, foreign invasions, each alone might not have toppled the empire. Together, over years and decades, they weakened Angkor until the inevitable retreat began. Picture yourself in the city as the decline takes root. You wake before dawn to walk to the fields, but the paddies look dry despite all your labor. You return home to find tax collectors waiting, their ledgers demanding more than you can give. At night, you hear rumors of Siamese armies marching closer, of nobles scheming in the palace, of monks quietly advising villagers to place their hopes not in kings, but in compassion. You fall asleep uneasy, knowing that something vast is shifting beyond your reach. So tonight, as you lie back, imagine those cracks, not sudden fractures, but hairline lines spreading slowly through stone, through soil, through society. Angkor still stood tall, but within it, the foundation was softening, and like a great tree slowly eaten from the inside, it would one day fall. The decline stretched on for generations, but there came a moment when the balance tipped, when the weight of droughts, wars, and exhaustion proved too heavy. The great city that had once drawn pilgrims and envoys from across Asia slowly emptied. The Great Abandonment, as it is sometimes called, was not a single night of flight, but a long, reluctant retreat. Imagine walking through Angkor as its people began to drift away. The markets are quieter now. Where once the clatter of pots and the cries of merchants filled the air, you hear only a few scattered voices. Stalls stand half empty, their goods fewer, their colors faded. The palaces, once bursting with courtiers, are subdued. Courtyards that held parades of elephants and dancers now see only the occasional envoy, the processions smaller and less dazzling. The reservoirs tell the story most clearly. Canals that once carried lifeblood to the fields lie choked with weeds. Embankments crumble, and no one repairs them in time. Water that once nourished crops stagnates, turning brackish. Farmers, desperate for better fortunes, pack up their belongings and move closer to more reliable rivers or into the orbit of rising Siamese cities. Each departure is small, but together they hollow out the city. The kings themselves began shifting their capitals southward, closer to the Mekong. They may have sensed what the ordinary people already knew. Angkor was no longer sustainable. Each time the court moved, it took artisans, scribes, and priests with it. What remained behind was stone, magnificent, unyielding stone. But stone cannot rule, cannot feed, cannot keep an empire alive. Still, Angkor was not a ghost town overnight. Picture yourself walking through the city in these twilight years. Monks still chant in temple courtyards. Farmers still bring baskets of rice to market, though fewer than before. Children still chase each other under the banyan trees. The city lived on, even as its heart weakened. But the hum of a metropolis of 1 million had dwindled to something more like the murmur of a large village. The jungle began to creep closer. Roots pried into cracks in the sandstone. Leaves shadowed the courtyards. Vines dangled from the towers. It was as though nature, patient and persistent, had been waiting centuries for her chance to reclaim the land. Slowly, she did. Temples became islands of stone in seas of green. Walkways disappeared beneath roots thicker than a man's body. Birds and monkeys replaced the sound of trumpets and drums. For those who left, there must have been sorrow. Imagine turning back to see Angkor Wat glowing in the morning light, its towers rising proudly above the forest, and knowing you might never return. For those who stayed, there was a strange intimacy, living among ruins, even as they were still being used, praying in temples, half swallowed by vines, carrying on traditions in the shadow of crumbling grandeur. History doesn't mark the exact day Angkor fell, because it never truly did in a single moment. It transformed, it shrank, shifted, and dispersed, leaving behind its monumental core as a skeleton of stone. The great abandonment was less a collapse than a sigh, a long exhale of an empire that had grown too large, too weary, too dependent on forces beyond its control. As you drift tonight, imagine yourself walking away from Angkor through gates once crowded, but now quiet. The jungle presses close, the path ahead uncertain, but behind you, the towers stand, silhouetted against the sky. They will remain long after you are gone, guardians of a memory that refuses to fade. Centuries passed, and though Angkor's kings and armies had gone, the stones remained. For a long time, it was not rulers or nobles who came here, but wanderers, pilgrims, and travelers who stumbled upon the ruins and tried to make sense of what they saw. To them, Angkor was no longer a living city, but a riddle carved in stone. Picture a Buddhist monk arriving at dawn, his orange robe bright against the gray sandstone. He lights incense at the foot of a weathered statue, chanting softly as the smoke curls upward into the jungle canopy. For him, Angkor was still sacred, not abandoned at all, but simply transformed into a place of prayer. Inscriptions carved long after the empire's height show that temples like Angkor Wat never entirely ceased to be used. They were not empty, only quieter. Foreign eyes brought other perspectives. Chinese envoys had written of Angkor even in its prime, recording its markets, canals, and festivals. Later, traders and pilgrims from surrounding kingdoms described the ruins as awe-inspiring, though by then vines and moss were already claiming the stones. To them, it was a place of mystery, too vast, too intricate, too silent to have been made by mere mortals. Imagine a weary traveler from Laos, pausing under the shade of a temple tower. He gazes up at the serene stone faces of Bayonne, their lips curved in slight smiles. He wonders who carved them, what power those kings once held, and why such grandeur was left to crumble. Without written records easily accessible to him, he fills the silence with his own stories, legends of giants, gods, or forgotten peoples who built the city and then vanished into the jungle. By the 16th century, Portuguese missionaries passed through and wrote accounts of a city greater than Rome. Their words, carried back to Europe, painted Angkor as a lost wonder hidden in the tropics. The exaggeration mattered less than the awe. They struggled, like so many others, to explain how such a city could exist in ruins, half swallowed by trees. For locals, though, the ruins were never forgotten. Villagers lived nearby, Monks tended shrines, and stories about the old kings were woven into folklore. To them, Angkor was not a lost city, but a sacred inheritance, proof of their ancestors' greatness, still resonant even in decline. Children grew up playing in the courtyards, climbing over stones carved centuries before, unaware that foreigners would one day marvel at them as discoveries. If you stand in those ruins during this in between age, you would hear neither the roar of an empire nor the chatter of modern tourists. Instead, you would hear the soft strike of a drum during a Buddhist ceremony, the occasional call of a bird echoing through empty galleries, and the hushed footsteps of a pilgrim tracing his way past moss covered statues. The ruins whispered. Even then, they told stories to anyone who paused long enough to listen, stories of labor and devotion, of kings and farmers, of gods and rivers. They were not silent, they simply spoke more quietly. So, as you drift further into rest, imagine yourself as one of those pilgrims. You arrive alone, carrying nothing but a small bundle of food and a stick to guide your way. You kneel before a weathered statue, the jungle rustling around you. You feel both tiny and comforted, aware that this place has outlasted kings, storms, and wars, and will likely outlast you too. Time moves forward, and eventually, the ruins that had lingered quietly in the jungle came to be rediscovered in the eyes of the wider world. For local monks and villagers, Angkor had never been lost, but to European explorers and scholars, its unveiling was like stepping into a forgotten legend. Picture the 19th century when French naturalists and surveyors hacked their way through thick jungle paths, pushing aside vines and mosquitoes, only to stumble into courtyards where stone towers loomed overhead. They wrote breathless accounts of Angkor Wat, describing it as one of the greatest monuments on earth. For them, it was as if a second Rome had been found in Cambodia, mysterious and untouched. One of the most famous visitors was Henri Mouhot, a French naturalist who arrived in the 1860s. Standing before Angkor Wat, he was stunned into reverence, comparing the ruins to the pyramids of Egypt. His published journals sparked fascination across Europe, igniting an age of archaeological interest. Imagine the excitement of readers in Paris or London, sipping tea while picturing a lost jungle city filled with silent towers and forgotten gods. Soon, teams of scholars, archaeologists, and treasure seekers followed. They mapped the temples, sketched carvings, and collected artifacts. Some came with respect, eager to preserve. Others came with greed, eager to take. Statues disappeared into private collections. Inscriptions were copied and carried away, and the ruins themselves bore the scars of both admiration and exploitation. Back in Cambodia, however, the ruins remained part of daily life. Local villagers guided foreign visitors through overgrown courtyards. Monks continued their prayers, and farmers worked the surrounding fields. To them, the idea that Angkor was a discovery must have seemed strange. It had always been there, a familiar presence in the landscape. The French colonial administration eventually claimed stewardship over the site, launching restoration projects. Picture scaffolding rising against the temple towers, workers carefully replacing blocks that had fallen, archaeologists brushing away centuries of moss. Their work saved many structures from further collapse, though at times they imposed their own interpretations, emphasizing grandeur while overlooking the quieter lives of those who had built the city. The world's fascination only deepened. Angkor became a symbol not just of Cambodian heritage, but of human ambition itself, the ability to carve a universe from stone, to command water and faith, and yet to lose it all to time and nature. Travelers from across the globe came to see the ruins, their footsteps echoing where kings once walked. If you close your eyes now, you can imagine standing there alongside those early explorers. The jungle presses in, cicadas screech, and then suddenly the trees open into a courtyard of towers rising against the sky. For a moment, you feel as they did, a mix of awe and disbelief that humans could create something so vast, so intricate, and then simply leave it behind. And yet, for all their astonishment, what they found was never lost. It was waiting, patiently, in the care of monks, villagers, and the jungle itself. The rediscovery was less about Angkor being revealed and more about the world finally learning to listen again. So tonight, as you settle deeper into rest, picture yourself as one of those explorers. You brush aside a curtain of vines, step into a gallery filled with apsaras dancing across the walls, and stand in silence. The ruins are not shouting their history, they are whispering it, as they always have. And now, you stand again in the present, surrounded by towers that have weathered centuries, roots that cling like old companions, and stones that seem to breathe with memory. The Khmer Empire has long since vanished, yet here in Angkor, its echo remains, steady, unyielding, and strangely comforting. Walk once more along the causeway of Angkor Wat at dawn. The sky blushes pink, the moat reflects the towers like a mirror, and tourists shuffle quietly, whispering as if in a cathedral. You can almost feel the generations pressing in, the kings who ordered these stones laid, the workers who carved every lotus, the villagers who carried rice to keep them fed, the monks who prayed here when the palaces had gone silent, the explorers who marveled as if they had found another world. Each face in the Bayonne still smiles with that same serene mystery, as though they know secrets you cannot. Each carving of apsaras still dances, as though time itself is their music. Each cracked wall still bears the weight of hands that built them, hands long turned to dust, but never forgotten. And beyond the stones, the legacy endures. Cambodia carries Angkor not only as a monument, but as a symbol of resilience. Through wars, colonization, and hardship, Angkor remained, a quiet anchor reminding its people that greatness once rose here and could rise again. Festivals are held, flags bear its silhouette, and millions journey from around the world to walk its galleries in reverent silence. But most of all, Angkor teaches patience. Empires rise and fall, kings come and go, water floods and recedes, yet the stones endure, whispering across centuries that nothing is truly lost, only transformed. So, as you lie back now, let yourself imagine sitting in the shade of a banyan tree, the cool moss beneath your hands, the towers of Angkor before you. The jungle hums softly, the air is warm but gentle, and the ruins seem less like remnants of a fall than guardians of memory. You breathe slowly, deeply, knowing that in this place, time does not rush. It drifts, like water in a canal, like incense smoke curling toward the sky. Let the whisper of Angkor be your lullaby tonight. Its rise, its glory, Its decline and its quiet endurance remind you that even in stillness, there is strength. The ruins may be old, but they are not gone. They are here, watching, waiting, reminding. And so, the story of Angkor drifts to a close. You have walked its avenues, crossed its causeways, and listened to the quiet hum of lives long past. You have seen farmers in their fields, kings in their courts, monks in their shrines, and travelers brushing vines aside in wonder. Each left their mark, and each has vanished, but the stones remain, patient, silent, and endlessly enduring. Now, in the stillness of your own room, let those images settle gently in your mind. Picture the calm smile of a stone face watching over you. Picture the quiet ripple of water through an ancient canal. Picture the apsaras frozen mid-dance, graceful and timeless. The noise of the day recedes, and all that is left is the slow breath of a city that never entirely died. You might imagine yourself lying on the cool stone steps of a temple, the stars wheeling above, the jungle rustling nearby. The air is warm, the sky infinite, and the ruins cradle you in their age-old embrace. The anxieties of your day feel smaller here, softened by the reminder that time moves slowly and everything passes. Even the mightiest empires fade, and yet beauty lingers. So let go. Allow your thoughts to drift like lotus petals floating across a pond. Let the calm rhythm of Angkor's story carry you toward rest. You are safe, you are small, and you are part of something vast and ancient. Sleep now with the knowledge that history hums quietly around you, patient as stone, gentle as water. The towers of Angkor will keep their watch, serene and eternal, until the morning comes.